speakers say, if you'd like to have a better relationship with your dad, or if you just wish that the relationship you had with your father was different, come up here to the front. We want to pray for you just to have a better relationship with your dad. And for a moment, my heart kind of swelled, and I thought, I know that 3 of my kids are in this audience. Out of the 600 plus kids that are in this audience, 3 of them are mine. And I have a pretty good relationship with my kids. I mean, I'm here at summer camp with them. This is the first time I've ever been to camp in my life. And I came here as a camp counselor, and one of them is even in my same cabin. But as I looked up, I saw my youngest one, 10 or 12 years old, go to the front and look back right at me. And it broke my heart. We had a chance later to talk about what that was all about. And I asked him, I thought we had a pretty good relationship. I thought things were pretty cool between us. Why would you go to the front and ask someone to pray for our relationship to be better? And he said, it used to be that every day when you drove off to work, I got a hug before you went out the door. Or I would run out to the sidewalk before you got in the truck, and I'd get a hug and a kiss before you got in the truck. And now I get a wave, I love you, out the door as you drive off. Now, I never really thought about the huge difference between those two things. As a dad, the amount of time that I spend with my kids is probably as much, if not more, than most dads. It's been different since I've been self-employed. It's been different since work was closer to home. But there was a season of my life, and I traveled 2 or 3 weeks out of the month. There was a season of my life when my kids were younger that I wasn't home at dinner, that I was gone before the sun came up and home after bedtime every single day. And what I want to talk about today is the attitude of communication. And here's what we often miss in the attitude of communication. We miss the fact that just because you said it, just because I said it, just because I spoke it, does not mean it was understood. It also doesn't mean that just because I spoke it, that my intentions were carried with it. Oftentimes, what someone hears is different than what we said. Same word, different meaning. I heard someone say not too long ago, when people ask me what my job is or what I do for a living, I don't answer them directly. Because my job title has a misconception. There are a lot of people that hear my job title and they already imply what that means. They have a view of that type of a person. They know what to expect from that type of person. They know what's going to come next in that conversation. And I get ruled out of conversations very regularly if I tell them what my job title is. So I just avoid that. I might tell them what tasks I've done today. Now, is that about being clear in your communication? Well, it is. But it's also about understanding that on the other side, on the receiving side, sometimes there are misconceptions. There are attitudes that already come with an understanding long before you get a chance to clearly express them. There are certain words that have a trigger behind them. An example might be during the presidency of George W. Bush, there were a lot of people who used 2 regular words to describe him: renegade and cowboy. And during the term of his presidency, the 2 words renegade and cowboy became extremely negative words. So if someone said, I'm a little bit of a renegade, meaning I tend to do things on my own. I'm entrepreneurial, I'm initiative, I take charge in the situation, I don't wait for somebody else to decide. But that word renegade, even though it might carry that meaning, carried a negative connotation because the political realm around it had a different weight. If you hear someone say the words Amway, a lot of people just run screaming the minute they hear the words Amway. Why? Because at some point in their life, they've been sold into Amway, or they've been asked to buy Amway, or asked to join Amway, and the way that it was presented to them was not a comfortable way. Or here's one for you, and this is really big in advertising worlds right now, timeshare. Yikes! Everybody wants to buy you out of your timeshare. Everybody wants to get you out of your timeshare. 15 negative reasons for having a timeshare. We used to own a timeshare. We did sell it because we just never had the time to take advantage of it. But the reality is a timeshare is a viable means of doing what you can't afford to do all on your own. But right now the words timeshare have a negative connotation. And no matter where you use them, they're not received well. When we talk about a team or an office workplace or an environment like a church or a small group or even within your family, There are certain misrepresentations or misexpectations that come along with communicating. I might say something and my wife hears it another way. In fact, we can go all the way back over 20 years now to our pre-marriage counseling. And we had this communication gap that even today still comes up, even today came up. And that is, I say one thing and she thinks I mean something else, or I say one thing, she adds to it her thought processes, and we get a totally different result. The way that I depicted that best when we first met and when we first got married was, I would say to her, quick, where's the fire extinguisher? And instead of saying it's under the sink, she would say to me, why? Is there a fire? Well, no, I just like the taste of it. Of course there's a fire, but I've already thought through all of that. All I need to know now is, where is the fire extinguisher? To me, that was a really clear question, but she wanted to understand all the details behind it. What's on fire? How did it catch on fire? Did you set it on fire? Was it an accident? Are we in danger? Will the house burn down? Do I need to get all my precious stuff out of the house? All of those questions flood into her mind, and for her, answering it cuts her off from getting all those answers. Just telling me where the fire extinguisher means she gets bypassed on all that other knowledge. Well, that's a communication style difference. And the attitude of communication says, I want so much to be clear that I'm going to learn to communicate in your language. I'm going to learn to speak in a way, or communicate to you in a way, that you have comfortably understood what I've said, not just that I feel like I've got it off my chest. When I train leaders and communicators, I use a method called ROAR. The ROAR acronym means relevant, you have ownership, you have authority, and you're responsible for the way people feel when you're done speaking. We often don't do that with an attitude of communication that starts first with being clearly understood. John Maxwell says all the time, it's more important to seek to be understood, or to seek to understand, than to seek to be understood. Seek to understand before you seek to be understood. Most people just want to get stuff off their chest a whole lot faster than they really want to understand the whole underlying environment. So, as usual, there are 4 pillars to good communication. The first one is clarity. Clarity means using words that are on the level of, or on par with, the person you're speaking to. I know you've never met anyone who's pedantic. I have, and I love to tell them when they are. Right now, I know you're Googling on your other line going, what in the world is pedantic? How do I find this out without losing my video? Pedantic. Here's a real simple explanation. People who use giant words to make themselves feel bigger and make you feel smaller all at the same time. Another way of saying that is condescending. But pedantic has a very specific meaning, and here's the irony to it. Most people who, by their verbosity, by their over-elocution of words, become pedantic and don't know what the word means. I can't tell you how many times, for the sake of clarity and clear communication, for great articulation, I have told someone, wow, you're really pedantic. And they say, well, thank you so much for saying that. And they don't have any idea how deep an insult it is to their communication style. That's about the words that we choose to use. It's about speaking on the level to the person we're talking to. Now, if you remember the old graph, and you've probably seen it 1,000 times, I don't remember who the originator was. It goes way, way back, and many people have been credited with it. I heard Scott Schilling even talking about it just yesterday on his video. 55% of our communication is in our body language. I love you doesn't sound like I love you. Even though the words are the same, the tone of voice in the body language doesn't say I love you. I teach this to communicators by saying I can show you that I can express anger to you even in words that are absolutely unintelligible, because it's about tone of voice. It's about body language. The words are only 7%. Now you can look at that one of 2 ways and say, well, if the words are only 7%, they're really not that important. Or you can look at it and say, like a laser, you only get 7% of your communication that are words. You better choose them very wisely. And yet we have people who tend to just vomit their ideas. They're not clear in them. You ask them a question and 45 minutes later they stop talking and they haven't said anything that answered the question you asked. They've expressed a lot of feelings, a lot of thoughts, and a lot of ideas, but you couldn't find the answer to your question if you tried. That's not clarity. Clarity is saying the most important thing first and last, and saying nothing else. The next pillar is conscious awareness. That conscious awareness means I understand that when I use a word like child abuse. Child abuse is a very evocative word. There are some people who flippantly use the word child abuse, and they might mean I didn't get ice cream when I wanted it. Someone took away my cell phone. I've actually heard teenagers say that. You're taking away my cell phone is like child abuse. No, it's not child abuse. Having a cell phone is an extreme privilege. You're less than 0.5% of the world's population to have a smartphone in your hand 24/7. To have it taken out of your hand for 1 month, 1 week, or 1 year is not child abuse. It may be a deprivation of your privileges. It is not child abuse. Being consciously aware, though, of what someone means by the words child abuse and how it might be a negative connotation that maybe even triggers PTSD for someone who was truly abused as a child, physically, emotionally, or sexually, those types of abuses stay with someone for a lifetime. And just the notion sends chills down your spine, makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up. And if you were to say to someone, I used to be a child abuser, their expectation isn't wrapped around what you meant to say, it's wrapped around how they experienced those words in the past. Conscious awareness means I look for every sign and symbol in the communication of the people around me, the people on my team, in my family, that I work with, on the streets, and I'm aware how the words that I say to them might trigger a response. Sometimes we trigger that response intentionally to evoke an emotion in order to bring things to the surface that we can have an open, honest conversation. Sometimes, though, it's best to leave sleeping dogs asleep. Consistency. If you ever worked around a boss or a leader or had someone in your family whose attitude toward communication is, I'm going to do baby talk with this person over here. Oh, I just understand your life is so hard. And over here, I demand this of you. I know you've been there. I've had bosses like that. It's real easy for that pendulum to swing, that they have a favorite and they treat this person in a certain way and they treat this person in another way, or they treat this group of people for whatever reason. Maybe it's social change, maybe it's a cultural thing, maybe it's a racial thing. They treat them differently than they treat this group of people, and so they communicate more often, more clearly, more directly. You know, we've talked about the attitudes of expectation. When you talk about the attitude of expectation, part of being able to reward people for their successes is having a level playing field. I expect the same of Group A that I do of Group B. They may have different job tasks, but I expect the same excellence, the same openness, the same communication, the same diligence, the same dedication to that task, even if that task is completely different from this team. When we are good communicators, when we have a proper attitude toward communication, that consistency is in the level of our communication. Now, granted, there are going to be those people who have superior intellect. They have a greater vocabulary. They have a greater education. They may even, within the realm of your workspace, have a greater understanding of the technical aspects of your job. And then there will be those who simply don't. Recently, I was working with a team, and one of the questions they had was, can we get this person to write this document in such a way that it can be used for this, and this? I said, well, no, because while that may seem like a practical request for a good writer, here's the reality. If you're a great copywriter for advertising sales and a great copywriter for product sales, you are an extremely rare individual. Because a good copywriter for advertising sales and a good copywriter for product sales are usually not the same person. Even within a group of copywriters, whether it's an advertising team, a marketing team, or a PR agency, you're going to find people who excel in one of those areas. And each of those are different from the person who might write a blog, or write an article, or write research material. Each of those are a different format of writing. And some people will excel at one of those far beyond the others. A good communicator, a good writer, or a great writer that can hit all of those on a 7 or above out of 10 is exceptional in their writing skill and their understanding of psychology and marketing languages. But for one person to hit all of those at a 9 or above is a phenomenon. That's a $250,000 a year copywriter kind of a person. To bring in a teenager and ask them to be able to write on all of those levels competently is a significant request. My suggestion is pick one. Copywriter, blog writer, social media writer, an overall writer, a reviewer. All of those are different formats of communication. And in all honesty, when you consider the nature of the reader, the person to whom you're communicating, the purpose for their reading it, What do they expect to get out of it? How will you reward them for having taken the time to read it? What's the payoff? Will they buy the product? Will they understand the review? Will they appreciate the content? Will their life be impacted and changed? Those are all different objectives. They're all different writing styles. They're all different expressions, even if it's the same core information. One adult who can do that phenomenally is an incredible adult. One teenager to do that would be a prodigy. And anybody else that's asked to do that is being set up for failure, I'm afraid. Because it's a very hard task for someone who has no other tasks. But for someone who's asked to do all of those things, that's a really daunting task. It's extremely time consuming. And any one of those pieces completed to its greatest couldn't be moved from one place to another. All of that is about communication. But it's not just about communication from the boss to the person being asked to do the task. It's understanding from the boss to the person being asked to do the task what the diversity of that communication looks like to the recipient of each type of piece. Within our work environments, we experience the same thing. I can't talk the same way to my wife that I do to my children. She and I have a different level of intimate communication and knowledge of each other that my children and I don't have. But I also have 2 teenage boys, and they think in boy. And boy and man, they speak a very, very similar language. Boy and girl, they don't. Have you noticed that? Mom says something to my teenage boys and they look at me and roll their eyes because they've already implied 15 jokes out of it because they're boys and that's what they do. And mom's looking at me going, what? I'm like, you don't want to know. Trust me, I know what's going on in their head. You don't want in there. That's an understanding of communication and understanding the differences, but it doesn't give you the right to violate the attitude of communication that requires consistency. Because consistency is about respect, it's about honor, it's about fairness, it's about communicating in a way every time so people know who you are and what to expect of you. That doesn't mean you have to speak the same language to everyone because you want to speak the recipient's language, not your own. But it does mean that you communicate at the same valuable level wherever they are. Does that make sense? If it doesn't, please type me a question in the comments. I'll be glad to either answer it in another video or reply in text. Glad to do that. The final part of communication as an attitude is consideration. And that is the consideration of how you're going to make that person feel. Remember the original acronym, ROAR. Be relevant, have ownership, meaning don't speak out of turn. If you don't know what you're talking about, shh. And have authority. Don't just say I've dabbled in this or I know something about it, but be an expert in it. I believe it's Seth Godin or maybe it was Malcolm Gladwell in the book Outliers said you'll be an expert after 10,000 hours of doing that. A 40-hour work week is 2,080 hours. That's 5 years to be a 10,000-hour expert at anything. I don't care what you've been doing for 5 years. If you've been doing it well for 5 years, you're an expert. Probably better than most people in the world, especially in today's ADD culture. We just don't finish anything that we start, right? So if you've been doing it well for 5 years, you're an expert, and you probably can speak on that subject better than anybody else. That makes you an authority. That doesn't just mean you have ownership, you've done it, but you're an authority on it. And then finally, be responsible for how they feel. That's where consideration comes in. The attitude of communication demands that we consider the feelings of others when we communicate. In the term of Scripture, it says, speak the truth in love. What that means is it doesn't seek to do anyone harm. Love is patient and kind. It is not boastful. It's not proud. It's not rude. It's not arrogant. It's not self-seeking. All of those are the nature of consideration of others. If you're going to speak the truth in love, then you're going to speak to other people in a way that they feel appreciated and valued and loved when you're done talking. And that may not be in a verbal communication. It may be in a handwritten letter. It may be in a text. You ever text anybody in all caps? Is that because you're too lazy to use upper or lower case or because you can't spell the words right? Or is it because you're always yelling? You know, that tone of voice with which you respond to someone, sometimes that tone of voice that you reply with is more important than the words that you say. Yes! Is completely different than yes. Or yes. That tone of voice alone is the difference in a considerate or an inconsiderate reply. A considerate or an inconsiderate request. I remind my entire family all the time, a request sounds like a question, ends with a please. Will you take out the trash, please? Is different than take the trash out, please. Wouldn't you agree? I think so. That's called consideration. consideration for how others feel, being responsible for how they feel when you're finished communicating with them. It doesn't matter if it's a birthday card, it's a giant book, it's a 45-minute keynote speech, a 4-hour training, or saying hello. If they feel less after you've communicated with them, your attitude's wrong in your communication. And that's on you to fix it, not them. So here are some phrases you will hear in an organization that has healthy attitudes toward communication. I heard you say time with your family is more important than a bonus. Would you prefer time off as an incentive for reaching your established goals? Now think about that for a minute. That communication format says, I understand that you have greater priorities. I'm considering what you find to be important. Giving me a $10 raise per paycheck is a lot less important than making sure that I get every Saturday off to spend time with my family. Giving me a $100 raise per paycheck is not as important as being off every Sunday so that I can go to my place of worship and spend time with my family. And I've made the mistake, even in the recent past, of giving up my time with my family for a little bit of money. And I almost always regret that. That consideration, that conscious awareness, that consistency makes a big difference. And why do you think I'm standing here doing this video? What is it? Almost 10 o'clock at night. Because I made a commitment to make this video daily. Yes, it's 12 hours late and I'm sorry for that. But today my family needed me in a different way. My son had to go take a test to get into school, and I had to make sure that he got there to do that. Then I had a sales call with the client, and I had to drive 50 miles from where my son was going to school to go close that deal and get the contract because advertising sales is what's important to my company. Then I had to go pick up my son from school. Then I had to go see my own doctor. Then I had to go back to the office and turn in my sales contracts and pick up my stuff for my project this weekend. All of those are important things, and communicating clearly to each of them as I move from one place to the other was very important. And I didn't want you to think this video wasn't equally important. Prioritize, yes. It got shifted to the bottom of the list in the end of the day, and I'm sorry for that, but I wouldn't let the day go without doing it. And I hope that attitude communicates to you clearly how important you are to me. And whether you're watching this now or you're watching it tomorrow, whether you're watching it in Cedar Hill or Dallas or Fort Worth or Belize, thank you. Thank you for expressing your appreciation just by clicking on the video and watching it to the end.